Morina, welcome to the meeting, councillors and staff, and any members of the public who may be watching. Just reminding us all that this meeting is being live streamed, and a copy of the recording of the meeting will be posted on our website after the meeting. And another reminder that the local government decision-making process doesn't offer any protection to councillors, council officers for any comments that are made during meetings which are subsequently deemed to be slanderous. Can I just say rules of engagement as per our protocols: microphones off when not speaking and digital hands up, please. And Amanda and Jenny will help manage the digital hands. Before we get into the meeting, can I thank staff for all of the work that's gone into today's agenda, and as you will note from the work program at Appendix 3 of the operating environment, we've done our best to prioritise work and hoping we can have a good discussion on that. So without further ado, there are no apologies, there is no public forum. Are there any new items to be added to the agenda? There are none. Any changes to order of business? None. Declarations of conflict of interest? None. Public excluded business to be transferred? None. So moving now to the minutes of the 27th of October, do I have someone who will move those as a true and correct record? Councillor Nees, thank you. Do I have a seconder?
There are a few. There's Councillor Winters, Councillor Thurston, Chairman Leader, Councillor McDonald.
So we'll go with Councillor Winters, thank you. So I'm going to move that the minutes be received and confirmed. All those in favour, aye, and against, carried. Thank you. So we're now going to move to the first report on the agenda, the operating environment, with presentations from Namuta, Julie, Sarah and Katarina. So without further ado, Namuta, I'll hand over to you and thank you.
Yeah, Koto councillors. The operating environment is on page 19 of your agenda. We will take that report as read. I will just say that there are a number of updates in terms of things that have happened, particularly in the last period between meetings. In particular, there's an update on climate change, an update on government reforms, in particular, resource management reform update, touches on the future for local government review, flags the launch of the Conservation Law Reform Roadmap, a copy of which is appended to this paper, highlights the National Environmental Standards for Drinking Water, which has also come out. Before I hand over to Katarina and Sarah to provide updates on modernising the emergency management framework trifecta and He Puapua, I would just note that as attachment 3 to your agenda, we have the strategy and policy updated work program, which, as Councillor Thompson has outlined, is an update of our prioritised program of work for this year. Of particular note, which wasn't included in the agenda, I would like to flag that in terms of RPS change 5 to the Kaituna River, we've only recently, yesterday, heard back from the Freshwater Commissioner, who has confirmed a 3-person panel for that change. And that panel consists of Anton Coffin, Rawiri Faulkner, and Councillor Von Dadelson. You'll recall usually these panels are a 5-person panel, and you'll recall we put forward 2 nominations from our council. So the Freshwater Commission has now come back and confirmed that 3-person panel. So I will now hand over to Sarah, who will talk through the modernising the emergency management framework trifecta, before handing over to Katarina to talk about He Puapua. So over to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Namuta, and good morning, councillors. The National Emergency Management Authority released an engagement document seeking feedback on modernising the emergency management framework. That was released on the 14th of January, and they sought comments across the sector by 11th of February, so last week. The purpose for the management authority in releasing the document was to seek views to help them design policy proposals for their new emergency management bill, which they are hoping to have in place later this year. And the main themes for that document were about tidying up some of the existing administrative issues in the regulations, a general consideration of roles and responsibilities, and most importantly, some options for improving iwi and Māori participation in the emergency management, both leadership framework as well as response. The Management Authority made it really clear that the issues that had any implications across multiple sectors or those that might be connected with local government review were not going to be addressed. We, as Regional Council, submitted and provided comments on the document as an administering authority for the Bay of Plenty CDM group, but also as partner to the group. The group itself, through our Bay of Plenty emergency management team, made a submission on behalf of the group, and the sector, emergency management CDM sector, submitted as well. The way the online form was designed made it quite difficult to provide overarching feedback. So it was limited to answering the specific questions, 22 questions. But we included some general comments in our feedback, noting that emergency management's inextricably linked to local government. So the key issues that need to be addressed by the sector will remain unanswered through these changes that they're proposing. We noted that there was a lack of detail in the proposals, which made it really difficult to understand the problem and comment on the options being put forward and the way in which we could assess those options. And we did note that while the proposals go some way to help providing for Māori input and participation, it really fell short in terms of developing a framework that ensures that mana whenua are involved in emergency management, and it ensures that local delivery, particularly through marae preparedness and response, can be enabled and empowered. We supported the local government New Zealand letter to the Minister, which was emphasising those concerns about timeframes for the engagement, and emphasising the concerns around a shift to a nationally controlled approach, which strips the risk assessment and planning responsibilities from local authorities. And that really touches on the fact that it was not, it withdrew any commentary from those things that might be linked to local government review. So that's a quick summary of the framework itself and our responses. I'm free to answer any questions.
Well, that was an excellent summary, Sarah. Thanks very much indeed for that. Councillors, any questions or comments? Councillor Brunning?
Thank you, and it's probably nothing to do with this piece of work, but just to advise that emergency management includes being able to reach out, or people to reach out when they may be in trouble. And with the windstorm of Sunday, the communications were completely out in my area. And so, you know, the responsibility going back to Spark, Chorus, all those outfits have to be improved. There was obviously no backup for a power source for cell towers, etc. So it just wasn't good enough. I mean, if we'd had to call an ambulance, we could not do it. It had no way of communicating out of our email, cell phone, landline. It was all down. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Brunning. Further questions or comments on that particular matter? I can't see any, so we'll move on to Katarina.
Morina, councillors. Can you hear me all right, Madam Chair? Thank you. So I'm just going to give you a brief update on He Puapua. He Puapua is a document, a think piece document that was developed in support of thinking and perspectives on the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which was issued by the United Nations in 2007. So Te Puni Kōkiri set up an independent working group to work on a declaration plan to give some effect to the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. And He Puapua sets some thinking and is being currently, it is not government policy, so parts of He Puapua are being used to provide perspectives into different government departments. So there is an independent working group that's been set up. Its focus using He Puapua is to design a targeted declaration plan, and it's done some targeted engagement with iwi entities at a national level. It's the government plans to produce a engagement report in March 2022. So next month we will get some more information on this. But just want to stress that it's not government policy. It's a starting point for wider conversation. It's one of several think pieces that's been used in the Māori space. But there is a program that the government's put out. So March 2022 is the report back on feedback from the targeted engagement and seeking approval of proposed processes for drafting a declaration plan. They're planning between April and May this year to draft a declaration plan. And they're going to seek Cabinet approval of a draft declaration plan and proposal for wider government consultation in June 2022, so this year in June. They plan to do public consultation between June and October in 2022, and then report back to Cabinet for approval of a declaration plan in December 2022, with the hope that they will release a declaration plan in February 2023.
Oh, Katarina, thank you very, very much for that. That's a really excellent summary again. Goodness gracious me, that's on a bit of a fast track as well, isn't it? We're all getting speed wobbles. Right, councillors, any questions or comments with relation to Katarina's update on He Puapua? I don't believe there are any. Jenny, yes. Oh no, Matty Moana. Is that?
And Councillor White.
And Councillor White, thank you.
Morena koutou, just a question to you, Kat. In the report, reading the report, is there any alignment within that with what we are doing? Did you see any similarities in what they're seeking to achieve?
Yes. Kia ora, Councillor. So in its initiatives that they have in the document, there are some clear alignment with what we're proposing to do in our Māori participation program. So for example, they're looking at opportunities for co-design and co-governance, which is what we're looking at and we already have existing anyway. They're looking at working in partnerships and identifying opportunities to devolve services. So it might be things like how we're focusing on providing opportunities for Māori to get involved in monitoring. Also, the one that is quite interesting and it's quite topical is it's looking at how the Crown monitors progress towards achieving equity by establishing specific measures in relation to areas of equity, and that's something that our council's looking at as well. So yes, absolute alignment with aspects of he puapua.
Thanks, Kat.
Councillor White and then Councillor Winters.
Kia ora koutou. Yeah, thanks, Kat, for your summary. Great summary. I guess my question really was, what is the expectation of the regional council in the context of the journey forward here? Obviously, that's going to be involved with consultation. I'm pleased to hear, Katarina, the alignment you talk about, that we're already on that page to a degree, but obviously this is requiring a deeper dive into things. And, in terms of United Nations declarations and New Zealand's, potential commitment to that. So I just wondered, is there anything, Katarina, that other than what you've answered to Mata Moana, that we would be expected to do at this stage, other than just wait and see and listen and get involved when the consultation rounds come around?
Thank you, Councillor White. Exactly that. It's, like I say, it's not government policy, but it may have some influence on what direction the government gives us in the future. We are ensuring as a team, we've got a program team that you'll meet when we have Komiti Māori next week, who are looking at all these relevant national documents and ensuring that we are aligning with government direction in this space. So we're keeping a watching brief on this and other think pieces.
Councillor Winters.
Yeah, good morning. Toy sent us a paper recently with the acronym UNDRIP, and I know it's not the right acronym. I think it's the right acronym, Toy. So how does this compare with what the work Toy's involved in terms of that work as well?
Thank you, Councillor. I'm not aware of that entity that Councillor Iti is involved in, but I do say that there are lots of different entities that the government is engaging with. There is and not just on this, but also on the reforms. So perhaps Councillor Iti might be able to answer that question. We will be bringing to Komiti Māori an action plan for our Māori Partnerships program. So that is, we've got a workshop following Komiti Māori next week, so we can have more consideration at that point in time.
Okay, thank you. Yep.
Councillor Iti, do you want to comment?
Yeah, sure. Kia ora, Paula. Kia ora, Katarina, and kia ora, Kevin. Yeah, UNDRIP is the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So that's what we signed up to. And the workshop I was doing and was involved in was run by DIA as part of the writing of this plan in terms of our obligations to the declaration. So it was just part of the consultation process, much like the Futures for Local Government that we're going through at the moment. Kia ora.
Thanks, Councillor Iti. Any further questions or comments with regards to Katarina's presentation? He puapua? I don't believe there are any. So
we've got Councillor Brunnings, Councillor Thompson and Councillor Thurston.
Oh, beg your pardon. Sorry, Councillor Brunning and then Councillor Thurston.
Quite happy to support this, but with this goes costs. And in all this legislation, government's very good at passing legislation, but when it comes back to local government, the costs fall back on. And there'll need to be a lot of resourcing around upskilling, education, all that sort of thing. So I just wonder whether any comments are made on that line. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. At the workshop following Komiti Māori next week, we will be presenting some budget. The action plan is within existing budgets at the moment. In terms of Māori capacity and capability, that conversation is being played out nationally, and we are very vocal as a regional council in ensuring that hapu and iwi and Māori are provided with resourcing so that the costs don't fall on council. But we do have existing budgets. We budgeted for some of our work that's going to be presented to you next week in our long-term plan. So at the moment, it's within existing budgets, our work program that we're going to present next week.
Thank you. Councillor Thurston.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mainly for Katarina and for Namuta, but in terms of process next week, I think the workshop is of critical importance following Committee Māori. But I just highlight and remind you all that from 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock next week, Minister Michael Wood is at the Tauranga Club on Tauranga transport matters, and also that yourself, Madam Chair, Councillor Von Daddleston, Councillor Nees and myself, and I presume Chairman Leader will be involved with Michael Wood from 4 till 5. So that it's going to knock a number of key individuals, not that I'm referring to ourselves as key individuals. Others may have a different point of view, of course. But just those councillors are going to be excluded from the workshop. So Amanda or some of the committee clerks, I think, need to have a little look at that, because it's a critical workshop for Committee Māori.
Thank you, Councillor. And if necessary, we can move the workshop timing, because it is very important. So thank you for that, and we'll look to see if we can make sure that we have a time where all the councillors are available.
Through the chair, can I just suggest that you work closely with Amanda on that?
Thank you, Councillor Thurston, for that. Okay, so councillors, turning to the report itself and the attachments, does anybody have any questions or comments with regards to the actual report and attachments, which includes our revised work program? So Jenny and Amanda, if you can just help me with hands up. Yes, Councillor Winters.
Councillor Nees and Councillor White.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paula. Look, just a question on page 36 of the second attachment. It talks about new World Health Air Quality Guidelines. That's the top page. Then it talks about the new MARPOL Act of 2021. That's for big ships coming in. They've got to burn proper light fuel coming into port. And then it's got marine protection rules. Nothing there. And then it goes on to reviewing the road user charges system. So it was something missing in that annex, because it just didn't quite make sense. On page 36, just before the start of attachment 3, Paula, with the tentative work program 2021, 22 to 24.
Yeah,
Namuta, there seems to be
Yes.
some wording missing.
Yep, so through the chair, I can see exactly what you mean on page 36. There seems to be the rest of the line missing, so we will endeavour to get that updated properly.
Thank you. I'm very particular about the marine protection rules, Madam Chair, so thank you.
Well spotted.
I did my homework.
Yeah, well done. Councillor Nees.
Kia ora, everyone. I've got 3 questions. The first is regarding the section on RMA reforms on page 20. The report mentions having to take the National Emissions Plan into consideration when developing policies, plans and rules. That's going to come into being later this year. What about when we will be required to take climate change into consideration for consent? Can somebody help me with that timeline? I've got 2 other questions too, Madam Chair.
Kia ora, Councillor Nees. I think I need to come back to you on that one. Obviously, with the National Emissions Reduction Plan, we're expecting that first plan to be released around the 31st of May this year. And as you've noted, we will need to give regard to it in making and amending regional policy statements and plans. But I'll need to come back to you in terms of consenting and when that triggers.
Okay, thank you. I look forward to that. The next item is on the future of local government review on page 21. I just thought I'd note that the point was made in the introduction to the webinar on Friday, that it was suggested that this be renamed the future of government, since a lot of the discussion went much further than the impacts of local government and had a lot of crossover with central government reforms. So I just wondered whether anybody could comment on that, perhaps you, Councillor Crosby, whether or not there's a thought towards rebranding that stream of work from LGNZ's position.
Through you, Chair, you're quite correct, Councillor Nees. It's become blatantly obvious that it's not just about local government, irrespective of the outcome, then it will impact on central government as well. In terms of the rebranding and renaming, that would be a matter that LGNZ would take up with the panel. They are operating under terms of reference set out by the government, so they're relatively restricted by that. But the name aside, the critical issue is looking ahead post April 23, when the panel produce their final report. There's no doubt, as you indicated, that any change will require a change from the central government perspective as well. And this all boils back to the matter that Councillor Thompson is constantly raising, is around the constitutional arrangements that might flow out of this. So yes, the name is one thing, but the actions will be another. So we'll just have to watch the space on how that pans out.
Thank you. I think that's a point that we need to make very strongly when we have our opportunity to talk to the panel directly, because at the moment people are assuming it's just to do with local government, but in fact it is so much more wider reaching than that. My last question is regarding the housing enabling legislation on page 35. There is a mention that our RPS definition of high hazard doesn't match that in the bill. So my question to staff is, will we have to make a change to our definition within our RPS? And if we do, we have had some differences of approach or opinion with Tauranga City Council with regard to our treatment of natural hazards. If we accept that new definition of high hazards, is that going to bring us more into line with Tauranga City Council's viewpoint or further away?
Kia ora, councillors, and I know Julie's online, so feel free to jump in, Julie. My understanding is with this bill, we would need to ensure that there is alignment, so it's likely we would need to update the definition accordingly. And in terms of greater alignment, I would need to follow up. I know the team are working hard on this at the moment in terms of understanding the implications across the organisation.
Julie, are you able to throw any light on our Councillor Nees's question?
No, sorry, Namuta's answer is all that I can offer at this stage. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And thanks, Councillor Nees. Those were excellent questions and points. Thank you very much. So, Councillor White, then Councillor Winters.
Well, kia ora, thanks for the paper. I don't have an excellent question, but I have a request. I'm a bit old school, so flicking through all of this and seeing those attachments, it was nice to see everything in one place. So I wouldn't mind a hard copy of that if I can, please. It'd be just nice to be able to sort of pin it on the wall and be able to go across and gaze across all of these wonderful timelines that we've got to meet. So that's my wonderful request.
Chairwoman, we can certainly provide that.
Same here too, please.
So, Councillor Winters, did you have a further question?
Yes, Madam Chair. This afternoon I've got meeting with RDC representatives and members of the Lake Tarawera community on funding options for Lake Tarawera sewage system. And the questions come, or the issues come back as said, oh, well, Three Waters has been signed and delivered. Why are we proceeding with Lake Tarawera sewage when in 2 years' time we may not have to pay for it and the rest of the country can pay for it? So there's a bit of pushback in terms of, because they saw that in October last year, the Three Waters legislation was signed. And I'm thinking, no, it wasn't. It was just the preliminary stuff. So can somebody give me an answer to go back to the community today and say, Three Waters has not been legislated yet. It was signed, it was passed in October last year, some preliminary work, but in terms of giving me a bit of feedback to help that discussion go forward to proceed with Lake Tarawera sewerage, please.
Yeah, Councillor Crosby.
Thank you, Stuart.
Thank you, Kevin, if I may, you're quite correct. I had a 6-hour Zoom meeting yesterday on Three Waters, so where it's at the moment is in terms of the government's proposed direction, it's on hold at the moment until a working group is reported back led by Doug Martin with regard to some critical issues of concern by the sector, which is really around governance and accountability, ownership, etc. That aside, there are two things happening. A transition unit has been set up on a no regrets basis, and what that means, if it all falls over, it stops. And they're well underway in terms of starting to engage with the 67 local authorities. So that's one issue. The second issue is, and it is out in the public, there is a draft bill, or they call it exposure draft at the moment, that we had a long conversation on yesterday about in terms of the structure of these entities. And that'll be followed up by another proposed bill in terms of operational. So at the moment, there is no legislation in the House at the moment, but it is proposed the first step of the legislation to create these entities should be in the House, as I understand it, around May this year for the first bill, and the second bill will follow. But that's all subject to the work being carried out at the moment by this particular working group to try and iron out some of the critical issues that are of concern to the sector and the broader community as well. And so in terms of the issue of Tarawera, my suggestion is carry on, because every day you wait, the price goes up significantly. And if this thing pans out the way it's proposed by the government, then any debt associated with a particular scheme on Three Waters will be repaid to the TLA and taken over by these new proposed water entities. So that's a very short answer.
Yeah, that's what I thought. That's what I thought, Stuart, but I just needed to clarify that these people are getting the wrong end of the stick, and it's all done and dusted by July 2024. Let's just sit back, do nothing, and everybody else will pay. So no, thanks for that explanation, because I need to push back really hard today to say it's not in our terms of reference for the working party to delay the scheme. And I'll be pushing back really hard saying we've got to proceed, and our job is to find other funding sources, and it won't be from regional council. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Winters. So, Councillor Crosby,
yes.
Are you happy to give us some lowdown on what's happening apart from a million things?
Just a couple of quick updates that relate to, I think it was page 21 on our report. With regard to RM reform, on Wednesday, tomorrow, through LGNZ, there will be a piece of work put out for advice and engagement that has a particular focus on enabling local voice in the future RM system, which of course is a major concern in terms of the proposal at the moment. Now that will be followed up on Thursday by a Zoom meeting for those that are able to link into that in terms of a broader explanation. Now this is a think piece coming out of the steering group set up by Minister Parker with a specific focus on this issue around getting local voice into the future RM system. So a very important piece of work. With regard to Future for Local Government, you'll be aware there is a series of 5 Zoom meetings underway at the moment, and on Friday will be the 3rd one that has a particular focus again on responsive local leadership. So there's this theme coming through on actually all the key three reforms, Three Waters, RM reform and Future for Local Government, is pulling back and trying to make sure that in these reforms that local communities actually will have a statutory say into these proposals, however they pan out. So they have a similar theme, again, RM reform on enabling local voice in a future RM system, and also Future for Local Government, particular focus on this Zoom on responsive local leadership. So if you are available, I'd encourage you to participate.
Thanks very much for that, Stuart. Stuart, I was going to say you're old enough, but you and I are kindred ages, so of course I won't say that. But my understanding was in 1986 or thereabouts, Local Government New Zealand tried to put a submission to government when it was looking at the Constitution Act to actually have local government as a formal part of New Zealand's Constitution Act, but it failed. Do you know in summary why that failed?
Like you was very young in 1986, and I was on a little Papamark Community Council, so it was above our pay grade. But what I can do is ask Dr. Mike Reid, who knows everything about everything on these matters, and I'll get back to you on that.
That's lovely. Thanks very much, Stuart. So, councillors, do we have any other questions or comments with regards this particular report? I don't know about you, councillors, but I've got the speed wobbles. So much happening and at pace. Thank you. So without further ado, I will move receipt of the report. A seconder, please. Can someone tell me who's seconded?
We've got Councillor Winters and Councillor Rose. Yeah.
Councillor von Dadelsum, and congratulations to you in terms of your appointment to the Freshwater panel, Councillor von Dadelsum. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, aye. Against, and carried. Thank you. We're now going to move to the Essential Freshwater Program update and welcome Julie and Nikki, I think we've got.
Yes, that's correct. We've got Julie and Nikki who have a short presentation.
Lovely. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you and good morning. I am just going to share my screen.
While she does that, councillors, we're on page 38 of your agendas for our Essential Freshwater Policy Programme 2022 deliverables and update on the national regs.
Sorry, that is not acting quickly. Right, can you now see that? Good morning, councillors, and thank you. This is an update paper, not seeking decisions currently, and giving you an outline of what's coming this year. So looking in section 2, initially in your paper, we note that late last year we gave you a more detailed outline of what had been achieved and what was coming. And the slide's taking a long time to change. So broadly, this is the program timeline you've seen before, but last year we focused a lot on technical work and the information that will underpin this process. There are a lot of technical reports being published and going up on our website at the moment now to support that. And on some of our early chapter review work, a lot of effort went into touching base with and starting to build that involvement with tangata whenua, and that will continue this year. And I guess if we had to sum up this year in short, it's really focusing in on the work we do in the freshwater management units, which is the setting of the vision outcomes, targets, limits, and the rule framework, the methods to achieve it. So a very big year coming up with all hands on deck. I understand you've asked about community engagement this year. In our timeline, our key engagement is next year. That's according to our community engagement plan and program plan. But this year we will also be doing quite a lot of touching base with the community online, as well as some targeted stakeholder and community engagement where it's sought. So I'll just pop to the next slide, which gives you a running list of some of the things that are recent and pending. We have recently sent letters to all iwi organisations inviting them to participate in the development of long-term visions for freshwater and outcomes. We're getting some good responses now, not across the board. There's a lot of iwi and hapu who are stretched at the moment, like we are, but we are making some good progress there now. We have an internal kaitiakitanga chapter review workshop, and we're also looking at inviting, I guess, RMA practitioners who have worked with that chapter in the regional plan from iwi who may have something to say about how effective or not that has been to inform that review of that chapter. We've got working groups, the TLA Freshwater Collaboration Forum, the Rural and Environmental Sector Organisation Forum, and Ngā Kai Tohu workshops coming up to progress different elements of our work. And we're really seeking from the district councils and the primary sector organisations in particular for them to provide as much advice and information as they can now as we start to think about the issues in these catchments and the potential solutions. We'd like them thinking and providing their thoughts up front as much as possible. We'll keep on asking for that as we progress that development through the year. We have online engagement planned for April on long-term visions for freshwater. And we're hoping that by then we will have had some input from some iwi and hapu so that we can express some of that feedback. But if not, this will continue alongside and help inform their input to us. We have a water quality reporting tool, which will be renamed with a much more exciting name shortly. There's been an internal competition on that. That will make it easy for the public to look at data and results about current state of water quality and ecological health at monitored sites. I think we're going to be offering a demonstration of that tool to you shortly, and that will be launched through our Freshwater Flash newsletter, which is also coming up. We have our accounting tool already online for groundwater, and our surface water one will be shortly. Technical publications, these are quite deep technical reports. What we are looking at doing is profiling some key findings of those through public comms, just to raise that awareness as we head towards 2023. We've had various recent meetings, sometimes in response to requests from organisations and sometimes to ask questions that are relevant to the work we're doing, and we'll be seeing more of that going forward this year. And the other key thing we're trying to develop at the moment, partly for internal use so that we're all using the same data in the same way, but also the intention is to make it public, is a dashboard of the key information that's come from those reports at an FMU scale, a freshwater management unit scale, that is easy to read and understand and gives some context about those FMUs prior to summaries of issues and the future options for the community. So I do have two other slides here that give a bit more detail on what's in progress, work in progress, work not started yet but pending this year, and work that has progressed as planned, which may be to a working draft stage for discussion and engagement with iwi and then stakeholders. It may not, it's certainly not finished products when it comes to planning deliverables. Technical reports, some of them are finished. So as a snapshot, gives a sense of how many different strands of work are on the go at once. won't go through each item of this, but this presentation will be made available to you as a quick snapshot, and you can ask further questions about items as you like. I guess coming through in the next few slides, you'll see the work I've just mentioned, which is around the National Objectives Framework, working on vision, outcomes, the water quality targets, options, limits, and the same for surface water quantity and for groundwater this year. This is where the rubber starts to hit the road. And what we're seeing, particularly, we did report risks to you last year and also to the Risk and Assurance Committee, some quite big risks associated with this program of work. And I guess we would say that at the beginning of this year, we've seen quite a few of them becoming issues. So we are seeing central government extending out their timelines for delivery of the amendments to wetlands regulations, extending out their timelines for freshwater farm plan regulations and for the overseer review work and the alternative risk tools. Their timelines are stretching into their second half of this year, and that starts to really impact our ability to bring it into our program now when we need them. So we're talking with other councils and with Christina, Rob and Ned, who work for the regional sector on implementation, about what we do about that, whether there's certain work we have to progress potentially with some duplication and try to align as we see central government's work come through, so that we're not left with a hole if it either doesn't come through or doesn't come as complete as we expected. We're also seeing capacity and capability issues occurring. For example, we have an expert panel with 6 experts on it who are in high demand by other regional councils. We had a timeline for their involvement. They were going to be workshopping with us for full days. Some of the COVID issues have meant that we've had to split that into 2-hour type Zoom workshops. There've been delays, which then pushes them where they had other commitments with other councils. So we're starting to see those things occur. And what we're doing at the moment is continuing to run our strands of work in parallel and keep ensuring that we're talking across strands of work to keep up to date. It doesn't mean that any of our work stops, but it makes it more difficult for us to integrate it. So just alerting you that those issues are real. And I guess one thing I picked up last week is that perhaps this regional council is quite fortunate. Some of the other regional councils are losing policy staff, sometimes to central government agencies, and some of their key technical staff, and then they're finding them difficult to replace. I don't think we're in that situation. I feel that we've got a really stable team and a team that really knows what needs to happen. So that particular one, we're quite fortunate. So before I move on to just an update of the NES for drinking water that's out for public consultation, are there any questions on our work program?
Councillor Neves.
Thank you. Just one question. I know that when we started working on freshwater, we were going freshwater management unit by unit, and we had 2 groups already set up where we were working with a combined community and Maori group. And I do acknowledge that we're going to be having a meeting of the Katarina Waitāhanui group, advisory group coming up. But I was really interested to hear that Greater Wellington is developing an integrated catchment by catchment co-governance approach in developing their plans and policies. They're not undertaking a separate process like we are of talking to tangata whenua. They are focusing more on a catchment by catchment approach. And they were saying that they're finding it to be very successful. So I guess my question is, at some point in our process, will we be drawing together in a place-based way both tangata whenua and the community and sectoral representatives, if appropriate, for them to develop a shared vision of the targets and objectives for their own freshwater management unit. Is that in our plan, or are we going to continue on our separate ways and not bring it together area by area?
So I'm not entirely familiar with Wellington's process. I do know that some of their whaitua processes were a lot further advanced by the time the NPS changes came about, and they decided to continue on that trajectory. So I think they were probably further ahead with their freshwater management unit work. In relation to vision, what we have done to date is collate a desktop collation of what's already out there and published in strategy documents, regional plan, RPS, iwi management plans and the like, to look at what a potential vision might look like. And we have sent that to iwi, inviting them to be involved in designing that vision. And some are very proactively saying, we want to develop it, we want to develop that way forward. We haven't formed co-governance bodies for each freshwater management unit. Wasn't developed in time for our program plan. That is something that potentially could develop out of this process, I think. We think we would have difficulty arriving at that in the time frame we've got. We're certainly informing and asking our co-governance fora that we have how they would like to be involved in this process all the way. My take on that would be that primarily they've been saying go back to the iwi organisations. We want to see what each iwi is saying. We'll continue to present material to them on what's coming back from that. So a bit of a different structure and approach here, yes. But certainly not going on our way by ourselves.
So Councillor White and then Councillor Brunning.
Thank you. Just looking at your endeavours in this space, it seems to be our best effort to work on co-creation and co-design, those two words that have been very much hanging in the ether for us, to consider how we might go about that. So I'm reasonably comfortable with the approach being taken here. I mean, we've got a lot on our plate, and I certainly acknowledge that my sense that this is our best effort. It does, again, raising the issue around capacity, and I know tangata whenua are stretched, and they are, and that risks very, very severely the ability for quality input, and we get bits of input, and I guess that's an answer to or response to Councillor Nees's notion of coming together. Yep, I think ideally that would be really good, but I think the capacity issues around tangata whenua, there needs to be a really focused effort in that space to get them to a place where there's a sort of a sense of a level playing field, where they can have that conversation with comfort, that that they are in that space where they have necessary resources to raise the quality of input. Otherwise, it can remain fragmented. I mean, tangata whenua do have many other irons in the fire at the moment, and in some cases are struggling to meet, quality targets, if you like. So I just wanted to just focus in on that capacity, capability, and delivery side of things. And maybe you can comment on that particular area now, just in terms of the capacity. What's your sense of direction in that particular space?
I think Ruben or Anaru would be best placed to report on that. My understanding is that we're starting to, in response to those letters for involvement and vision setting, we've had some responses very keen to be involved, and we do have some resourcing to support that involvement. And some iwi relative silence, and Ruben and Anaru and the team continue to make contact and try to progress but that capacity and capability issue is real, and sometimes the priorities of the iwi or the hapu are different. That aren't focused on freshwater at the present time. So I think that progress is being made from what I'm observing. There's some exciting discussions occurring. It's at all different stages and levels for different iwi.
No, thank you for that. I'm just personally aware that sometimes when iwi have struggled to come to the table, other entities have tried to consult with them, and of course they don't get the responses that they want, so they take the space and start leading out, and then later in the piece, tangata whenua will come back online and say, well, we haven't been consulted. So there is an issue around that type of space that I think needs to be considered, because what it ultimately can end up being, there's a significant distance between parties, and when you're going into sort of funding arrangements and other things, that can come horribly unstuck if it's not actually, I guess, calibrated in the right way, where tangata whenua are actually involved, and there is a process for that sometimes is not necessarily recognised by certain entities. If you can't get a hold of iwi, we'll do it ourselves. Well, yeah, that's one way of doing it, but unfortunately, that the foundations for that in terms of resilience is a bit doubtful.
Councillor Brunning.
Yes, thank you. My concern is around the Tauranga Moana and Western Bay area. And yes, you've got treaty settlements yet to come. So that's one side of it. But Tauranga is a fastly growing city. The whole region is vastly growing. We've got a hugely growing economy. And to not be engaging and having that debate in this area until next year, we need to heighten what we're going to do and what the questions are going to be, because there's going to be competition for resources. And so I would urge us to be talking across our communities, industry, conservation groups, iwi, councils. It's vast, and we have to do something. Thank you.
Nikki, do you want to comment, or Namuta?
I expect that we will be making a huge effort next year once we have a story of the issues. We've pulled together the different pieces of technical research to really understand what the problem areas are and explored what the potential options are, that we will be having an intensive amount of work focused on getting that engagement across all of those parties throughout 2023. That's the intent. And we are aiming to start getting that story out to the public more this year. So as the work becomes available and ready to put out there. So it's certainly not an intent not to have that engagement. It's an intention to do it right throughout 2023.
And through the chair as well, we will, in the paper coming to your September meeting, we'll be seeking your approval of the communication and engagement plan for 2023 as well.
Yeah, I just think, following up on Councillor Brunning's point, though, we can't lose sight of the fact that there are local government elections, and that there will be a number of issues that will no doubt, have fairly high profile. And this is certainly probably going to be one of those areas. So I do think we need to factor that in and make sure that our organisation, including governance, is well placed to be able to articulate the main features of what's required of us and what is in fact happening, and how in fact communities will be engaged. So any further matters at this particular time before we move on with Nikki? Okay, Nikki, I think we're on to your next slides.
Just a note that the National Environmental Standard for drinking water is proposed to be amended by central government and is out for public consultation at the moment. So that follows the gazettal of the Water Services Act, which was passed last year, and that's set up for drinking water source protection. this NES really does have quite a few implications for regional councils, because it sets out how source water protection areas might be mapped through a default method, and it places regional councils and with quite a high responsibility to do that mapping, and it appears to include that into regional plans. So it has an implication for this freshwater policy process. We'd have to wrap it into this regional planning process. And what we're trying to assess at the moment is A, the method of delineating those areas, but B, the consultation documents are a little bit vague about what the expected protection would be in each of the 3 protection zones they're talking about. So we're working through that. We've got a information discussion with MFE shortly. And I guess that would apply to surface water takes and groundwater, and to water users who are supplying more than one party. So not just the large drinking water suppliers at the moment, but to pretty much all drinking water suppliers. So as we understand it, that means thousands of these protection zones potentially. We're still trying to grapple with the intent versus the practicality, and what to submit. Our submission is due on the 6th of March. Lisa Power is leading the development of it, and I understand it will be shared, a draft will be shared with you, with councillors for comment.
So I recognise Councillor Winters, but before then, Nikki, this to me is a really important area for regional councils going forward. And I would like to think that we're kept really up to date with the requirements, obviously, when they become clear, but as importantly, the accountabilities and the risks that lie with those accountabilities, because this to me is really significant. And the accountability issue also will relate to co-governance entities, etc. So just if we could be kept pretty appraised of all of that. Councillor Winters.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I'm just the 3 bullet points there, Nikki, in terms of our role is going to be protecting all the registered water suppliers. What about the unregistered water suppliers? Who's going to be involved in finding them all? Because when Bill Bayfield talked to us, he said there could be about 90,000 of them, different schemes right across the country. You know, it could be a landowner supplying half a dozen homes in close proximity to a spring. They're all unregistered. And then he said, you know, that they've got 7 years to come up to speed in terms of the drinking water standards. So who's going to be finding all those unregistered water suppliers that have to come up to standard? Because I hope it's not our job.
That's a good question, because the Water Services Act requires them to register with Taumata Arawai. So if they don't, I'd have to go back into the new legislation and check, but I would assume it's their job to follow up on that act. But we have asked that question ourselves lately, because that would, if they wanted to pursue compliance with that registration, I imagine they would come back to regional councils. So once they are, if they're not registered, it would be very difficult for us to deliver this next part, which was the source water protection area for them as well. So has that roll-on effect? Anything registered, we would have to respond to in our plan.
So Chairman Leader and then Councillor Nees.
Thanks, Chair. Look, I think there's 2 things fall out of this. One is prioritisation, and we've got a session with Bill Bayfield so we can ask him some of these questions. And the second one is practicality. So outside the territorial councils themselves who run the drinking water source on behalf of their communities, within our council, we have a database of all bores that have been sunk, presumably in the last 10, 15 years. For those water source suppliers that Councillor Winters mentioned, and most dairy farms would supply more than one house, as part of your compliance on your food safety program for your product, each and every year, the processor conducts water quality testing on your farm. Yep. So again, practicality and prioritisation, I think it's just asking the right people the right questions, and an ability to get a relatively high level of assurance what's out there and what's being complied with, I think is pretty reasonable.
Okay. Thanks, Chairman Leader. Councillor Nees.
I'm just foreseeing that there's going to be a huge amount of overlapping with the different freshwater drinking water sources. I'm just so aware of where I live. There's a metropolitan drinking water source. There's so many little bores that actually go down into the aquifers at all different depths. And then there's a whole lot of people that have got water takes and they get their drinking water from the stream at the bottom of the gully. And, you know, we have issues at the top where people dump their rubbish, and there are all sorts of pest animals that sort of live in that gully. And so this whole issue is going to be really fraught, I believe. So I'm just hoping that, as we have done with consultation with government over the development of the standards for farm plans, etc., that somebody is actually talking to the government and saying, look, these are the implications on the ground if you do this. That there may be unintended consequences if you frame it in this way, because I just see that it could tie up a huge amount of resource for regional councils, and as Chairman Leader says, it needs to be practical, and it may be that we're going to have to be really focused on prioritisation. So we focus on the drinking water supplies for major urban areas, and then once that's all done to our satisfaction, then we look at mapping the smaller supplies and see where that overlaps with those other big areas that we've already protected. It just could be bigger than being here, and I really hope that somebody's talking to government about the implications of what they give us to implement.
Thanks, Councillor Nees. So, Nikki, do you want to make any comments in relation to our comments?
I'd just note that Lisa is in a meeting with MFE now about that with other councils, so hopefully those questions are being raised.
Great.
I think they're common across all regional councils.
Thanks, Nikki. Next slide.
That's all from me.
Oh, Nikki.
It was a questions slide. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Excellent. So, councillors, any final questions or comments before Nikki departs? Nikki, thank you. That was an excellent summarised version of where we're at. Phew. Yeah. Best of luck.
Thank you.
Chairman Leader, Councillor Thompson.
I beg your pardon. Sorry, Chairman.
Oh, sorry, I'm just unmuting. Hey, can I just take a step backwards, Chair? And in your previous operating environment, there was an issue raised about what I will refer to as trade waste. So that's construction waste. And just to make you aware that in my discussions with Commissioner Tolley and Mayor Webber, they have raised the issue in the Western Bay of Plenty. This is becoming a really serious issue, with challenges around the community in terms of where the stuff is processed. As recently as the prosecution in the Tauranga Harbour, which was a whole lot of trade waste concrete being chucked into the harbour, and who ultimately is accountable for removing that. At the Smart Growth Forum, they want to bring forward an agenda in terms of how we approach a regional trade waste strategy, because it's becoming increasingly critical with the winding down of the trade waste depot that used to be in Tauriko. So we're now, in the interest of climate change, trucking all trade waste up north to just south of Auckland, and in the interest of the community, and we don't think that's appropriate. So I'll just flag it to you. I've raised it with the Chief Executive, who's going to be accountable in terms of doing some work around this, but I think it's a serious issue, not just for the Western Bay, but also the Greater Bay of Plenty and the other regions.
Oh, thanks very much, Chair. Absolutely spot on. An important issue. Any further questions or comments? We've thanked Nikki very much for her work in this area. I'm going to move receipt of the report. I second to Councillor Winters. All those in favour, aye, against and carried.
Thank you.
Councillors, do you need a cup of tea before we move into public excluded, or do you want to keep going? Cup of tea? Can people nod to a cup of tea? How many nods have we got, Namuta?
Majority.
Thank you very much. So if it's okay, Amanda and Jenny, I'd like to adjourn the meeting for 10 minutes for